Hey guys, real quick before we start the video, I want to direct you to the community tab on my channel. I am currently running an event for you, the viewers, to rate every single Monster Hunter monster from 1 to 5 stars. This project is going to be a bit of a run back from the 20th anniversary popularity poll and is meant to allow everyone to voice their opinion on every monster, so we can get a big picture look at how the whole community feels about the entire Monster Hunter bestiary. There will be a new poll on the community tab every single day at noon Eastern Standard Time, and all polls will remain live on the channel, so you can answer any of them at any time. You will not miss out if you miss the poll for the day. I will be updating numbers all the way from now until the end of October when the last polls have been run, and in October or November, we're going to have a massive video event where your comments will be read, all the numbers will be crunched, and the monsters will be reordered based on how you all voted. Every vote on every poll matters, and anyone has a chance to have their comment read in the video itself. And if you want to help me get more data and reach the broader Monster Hunter community, I'd appreciate a like on this video and, maybe hit the subscribe button to help this channel grow. It'll put me and this project in front of more eyes. Okay, no more YouTuber CTA shilling. Here's the video you actually clicked on. Thank you. See, this is kind of funny. I was actually planning to make a video exactly like this one, but for Crystalbeard Uragaan, because let's be honest, that's probably the worst of the deviants. But with all of the memes about Steel Uragaan because of the anniversary poll, well, come on, I kinda have to make this video now. So, due to the merits of alphabetical order, Steel Uragaan is broadly considered to be the least popular Monster Hunter monster of all time. Now, technically, he is tied with the Desert Celtis. And Desert Celtis kind of gets left out of this conversation a little bit, has been made fun of far less. But the thing about Desert Celtis is that he is one part of a larger whole with the Desert Celtis Queen, and that pairing is generally pretty good, has enough changes in there to stand out from the regular Celtis and Celtis Queen. But Steel Uragaan here, well, he lacks that very specific caveats that Desert Celtis has. Steel Uragaan was rated on par with a monster that almost isn't really considered its own individual boss monster creature because he is the subspecies of another monster who is the lesser part of a greater whole. That is how the community feels about Steel Uragaan. And it's not too shocking, right? Steel Uragaan has only ever appeared in Portable Third and Tri-Ultimate, which are older games that predate Monster Hunter's international boom. Uragaan is not a universally beloved monster in his own right. There is another, more well-known variation of Uragaan in the form of Crystalbeard, and also Radoban, kinda. Steel Uragaan is not a massive mechanical departure from his creature of origin, and he comes packed with a typically disliked status, that being soiled, the debuff that locks you out of your consumable items for a limited time, unless you bring deodorant with you. It ain't hard to wrap your head around why this guy would tie for last place. I mean, something has to be in last, right? That's how lists like this work. So, I say we give the guy a bit of a facelift. I mean, why not? There's some form of salvageable quality in pretty much every monster in Monster Hunter. There's a cool animal in here somewhere, so let's see if we can find it. Because most of you are probably pretty unfamiliar with this guy, considering that, let's revisit Steel Uragaan first and see what we're working with. So, the big deal about Steel Uragaan is that the change in its shell color and status usage comes from the consumption of ores that contain high amounts of sulfur. It is the pungent odor of this sulfuric gas byproduct that inflicts the soiled ailment, and the presence of it within his body causes the metal ores that makes up Uragaan's shell to oxidize and turn blue. Fortunately for the Steel Uragaan, this process strengthens its shell, rather than cause it to corrode, as oxidizing would typically do to ores. In terms of combat, this means that Steel Uragaan's gas attack deals soiled instead of sleep, and when the rocks he flings explode, it is with a burst of fire and stench clouds at the same time. I believe he is also capable of rolling for a longer period of time. That's pretty much it for combat changes in comparison to the 3rd generation regular Uragaan. Very quickly, I'll cover a few more ecological differences between the two so we know what else we're working with here. Though they are seen in the same volcanic regions, it's possible that Steel Uragans have carved out separate territories that are more plentiful in their preferred ore. These volcanic regions are very likely much hotter than those patrolled by typical Uragan. This can be deduced due to the red coloration of the Steel Uragan's chin, which is a change caused by the chin striking things with higher temperatures. Also, Steel Uragan, though less common than traditional Uragan, do still live in family herds. Okay, so that's what we're running with. There's not a ton of new layers added to Steel Uragan, but I think we can make something work here. Right from the get-go, if we are to modernize Steel Uragan, he's going to need the regular Uragan's 5th generation changes. We want him on par with where his cousin is right now. 5th generation Uragan wasn't changed too drastically, but he has a far easier time dropping his exploding rocks, and a plethora of his attacks come with the extra effect of releasing these blast-prone projectiles. Additionally, when Uragan rolls through the rocks he drops, he is capable of igniting his whole body, becoming a massive spinning flame wheel. We'll give Steel Uragan this similarly easy rock deployment and allow him to be wreathed in fire and sulfuric stench when he rolls over the bomb rocks he drops. Starting with these changes, I think we've already made Steel Uragan a bit more respectable. While not the gold standard of World's roster, Uragan's most recent outing absolutely upped his fun factor and spread out the usage of his moves. He's far less reliant on his rolling attacks and isn't nearly the clock killer that he used to be. This balancing act for attack usage is already going to do Steel Uragan a couple of favors. Now for some more aesthetic changes. Little extra details to give the guy a layer of distinction. Mainly, I want to change up the sound design of Steel Uragan a little bit. I want to add a bit of a metallic sound effect to his footsteps, chin slams, and other attacks. Give his movements a bit of a deep metal ringing to them, just to sell the steel aspect of his name and his hide. Staying on the topic of sound design, a commenter on my 20th anniversary breakdown video offered up a cool idea to have an enraged Steel Uragan's roar be pitched down. He mentioned that sulfur hexafluoride does basically the opposite of what helium does to your voice. He even threw out the idea of having soil-affected hunters have their voices pitched down as well. Thirdly, since the sulfur is causing the ores in Steel Uragan's shell to oxidize, you could maintain that same vibrant blue coloration, but dull its ability to reflect light a little bit in comparison to a regular Uragan. And now finally with the aesthetics, and I want to wrap back around to this a little later, the chin of Steel Uragan should be noticeably smaller than that of a normal Uragan. An Uragan's chin is the size and color it is because it smashes down ore with this massive blunt instrument, and when he does, bits and pieces of rock and metal accumulate and build into several small layers of sediment in the Uragan's chin. So an older Uragan would find itself with a larger, sturdier chin. If Steel's chin is so consistently heated up due to it living in a hotter environment that it is permanently a different, redder color, you could have it so that Steel's chin is smaller because the intense temperature would make it harder for some minerals and metals to stick. Immediately, with these 4 small aesthetic changes, I think you'll be able to add a little just extra life and distinction between Uragan and Steel Uragan. Take advantage of those little differences in their function and biology to make them feel like separate animals. To add on to potential minor changes we can work with, I want to talk about some map interactions that we can do to make Steel Uragan, again, feel a little bit more ecologically distinct. I would slightly change the pathing of Steel Uragan's territory in comparison to that of a regular Uragan. Given a hypothetical volcano map, I would have Steel Uragan spawn deeper within the volcano than your regular Uragan. I would also have it that Steel Uragan would be much more likely to stay in that fiery core of the map, whereas the standard Uragan would have a much wider territory range within this map. This is a simple difference that further sells that heated chin of the Steel Uragan and the stated lower populations of their subspecies, the implication being that they're dwelling in these more volatile parts of the volcano, which means it's tougher for their population to grow and expand. So I do actually want to talk about this fiery chin a little bit more. On top of wanting to make it smaller, because of the heat it exudes, I actually want to make it a more vulnerable hit zone right from the jump. Typically, you gotta damage an Uragan chin to make it a weak point, but with Steel, the softer, hotter ore in his chin, should make it weaker. Now, to compensate for this, I want to make his chin slam attacks more dangerous. Let's make it a more advantageous place to attack. However, getting greedy with this weak point results in harsher repercussions. I want Steel Uragan's chin slams to cause small bursts of fire on the ground with every singular impact. You should keep the splash zone relatively small. This should just be a simple get-off-me tool for his weak spot, but the danger remains for anyone who doesn't back up when Uragaan starts slamming that hammer down. I think changing up these dynamics with Uragan's most distinct feature can serve to make Steel feel like more than just the stench subspecies of Uragaan. I also believe that these hit zone and damage changes absolutely add a bit of a fun risk-reward factor to the fight, whilst making use of Steel Uragan's unique traits. Now, looking at Uragaan's other major trait, that being his rolling, I want to find a cool way to change this move up a little bit. I'm going to fire off just a couple of different ideas here that I don't think all need to be packaged together, but individually, they could be neat little tricks to make the roll attack a bit more varied in comparison to the regular Uragaan. Some ideas I have for the roll include being able to fire off a quick burst of soiled stench whilst he's in the middle of a roll, or comboing out of the roll into a new move altogether. I imagine something along the lines of a Steel Uragaan ending his roll with like this skidding slide that kind of works like a hip check, or maybe when he lands, he follows it up with a chin slam or like a tail swing, something like that, and there could be a subtle animation tell as to which one he's gonna throw out when he stops rolling. Any of these new moves that he does out of his roll could perhaps be explained by the fact that the Steel Uragaan shell is a bit denser and heavier than the species is normally built for. Perhaps it's a little bit unwieldy, and when he exits that roll, the extra momentum is a little bit more difficult to control, and he has to put that momentum somewhere. The aforementioned commenter also threw out the idea of Steel Uragaan leaving stench clouds in the wake of his rolling, in an attempt to box in hunters before he detonates the clouds with a chin slam. This type of tactic could be pretty sick as well. There's a lot of monsters who do stuff like this, though I think it would make a little bit more sense if he tried to box you in with the exploding rocks, creating a bit of a minefield for you to try and evade before he blows it all up. Same effect, but this is just a tad more consistent with how Uragaan operates. I'm pretty satisfied with how we've altered Uragaan's defining combat gimmicks here, so now I want to brainstorm a couple of newer attacks. A Monster Hunter cinematic that has stuck with me for a while is the introduction of Monster Hunter Generations. I love how Glavenus uses his tail as like this massive shield against several of the hunter's attacks, and thought that a tail shield could make for a pretty badass tool for a Brute Wyvern. Since Uragaan is the big beefy tank of the Brute Wyverns, and the nomenclature Steel suggests hardiness and stalwart defense, I like the idea of making Steel Uragaan a bit more of a juggernaut compared to his already hefty relative. I'd do almost the exact same thing Glavenus does in the cutscene. Steel Uragaan brings the massive tail up in front of him and guards his more vulnerable chin weak point. If we do this, we probably want the top of Steel Uragaan's tail to have some more resilient hit zones, or the tail itself could have a higher health threshold needed to sever it. And we could have it so that a successful tail sever could prevent Steel Uragaan from using his tail shield technique entirely as well. And, in general, I think dynamic part breaks are very well liked by the community, so that does Steel Uragaan an extra favor on top of that. Now, if we want to push this even further, we could even have this tail shield serve as sort of like a ready stance for Steel Uragaan. Kind of like how, Zamtrios will hold that hip check animation, and he'll just hold it in place before he can fire off a couple of different attacks from it to kind of like bait hunters into a certain reaction or make them guess when that attack is going to come out. We could have Steel Uragaan transition out of his tail shield block into a roll or a massive tail whip or something like that. You could get a few seconds to whack at the tail, and then you need to get yourself out of there before the next big hit comes through. This could make Steel Uragaan feel like more than just the soiled Uragaan, but also the tankier, bulkier Uragaan. And my final suggestion for Steel Uragaan is kind of a special one. It is mentioned in Steel Uragaan's ecology that they are herd animals, and that the combined force of all of them moving together has been the cause of damaging earthquakes. Now, we are not going to turn Steel Uragaan into a guaranteed double fight. That would suck. However, I do propose a special event quest that contains 2 Steel Uragaan, probably a single arena event quest too. and these two Steel Uragaan would gain additional strength when they're together. I got the idea from the multitude of partner battles that exist in Monster Hunter Frontier. Specifically, there is this double Quadrusapusu quest that takes place out in the desert, where the two can combine their light-reflecting powers to create a massive, blinding ball of heat. I want to have a special Steel Uragaan quest where the combination of their power together creates bigger quakes and explosions. I know that sounds kind of miserable, but hey, first off, tremor resistance is a skill, go equip it. And second of all, I'm always kind of down for these painful, challenging event quests every now and again. I think the infamy tends to kind of wrap itself back around to fondness after some time. And honestly, I ain't even saying we gotta go on some frontier level bullshit. I just think the idea is a good general template to use. You could have it so that, for the most part, it's just a typical fight between two Steel Uragaan, but they'll occasionally have some bond attacks, similar to, say, Teostra and Lunastra. You could have them combine their chin slams together to cause quakes with larger AoEs. You could have them roll into one another to create a massive shockwave. You could have one drop a whole lot of explosive rocks, only for the second one to very quickly detonate them, making the move that much more difficult to react to. I think you could make a pretty damn memorable quest by capitalizing on the group lifestyle that these animals are supposed to have. And that, my friends, is how I would make the Steel Uragaan a fun, flashy, new fight should he ever return to Monster Hunter. I didn't want to simply overload him with new soiled and stench attacks, as I know it's an ailment people don't love all that much. Though it's easy enough to deal with, I didn't want to stuff and cram the fight with nothing but the specific debuff. I figured there were more ways we could tweak him and change him around to make him feel like a full-fledged creature and not just a color swap with a new debuff. I wanted to capitalize on what few biological changes there were to work with, and I wanted to try and make every aspect of the Uragaan species have a special incarnation for Steel. The fire bursts for his molten chin, the defensive combat to complement his Steel title, more mix-ups and danger from his roll attacks while not over-relying on them like previous Uragaans tended to do. Give him a special event to utilize the social behaviors of the species, and a number of minor aesthetic changes to grant him a few additional details for dorks like us to cling on to. There absolutely is a cool monster in Steel Uragaan, and I'd like to think I've provided a few ways in which we can make that possible. I hope you've enjoyed this little tribute to the lowest rated monster of all time, and feel free to let me know which monsters you'd like to see get a revamp treatment. If you like this video, I've got similar ones for Lao Shen Lung and the Wrath subspecies that you can also check out. This has been CR-Volcanic, or Connor. I'll see you around. Shout out to all the patrons, and special shout out to Nihilist Chimerax, Datboy Doin Da Ding, Sir Newt Newt, Peaberry, Stefan Kalnin, Shaggy Grizzly, Pico Plush, and Daniel Delasarte. Thank you very much.